Hey guys, welcome to this bonus episode of our car podcast. And for those of you who have been watching our videos, you will be familiar with the man to my left. Howdy, Paul.
Hey, how's everyone doing?
Paul, on Top Gear they used to call the Stig, which you were, by the way, the tame race car driver. Well, I'm going to call you the wild race car driver. You're still living in the wild.
It's true. I do live up in the mountains, so I'm still semi-feral, I think.
And for those of you guys, like I say, who've been watching our videos, you know that Paul does all of our performance car reviews. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about a lot of fun things. First and foremost, we're going to get into what the Mustang's like as a track car, because you just got back from the Mustang program.
I did, yeah. I was down at Charlotte Motor Speedway for the launch of the Dark Horse, and got to drive that out on the track. So that was quite interesting.
And then, of course, we're going to talk about various automotive topics, which Paul, I'm sure, has a lot of opinions about. For instance, should supercar manufacturers be building crossovers and SUVs? But before we get to any of that, let's talk about you, Paul.
Okay, if you're going to make me, right?
I'm going to make you.
Twist my arm.
Yeah, so how did you become a race car driver?
So I started driving actually quite late because I was forbidden from doing so by my parents when I was younger. I've always wanted to do it since I was a little kid. My grandparents in England, when I lived there, I was born in England, lived near a racetrack, and we drove by it every Sunday on the way to my grandparents' house. My parents would never let me go there. So you know that thing, like the forbidden fruit thing, right?
Sure, yeah.
They wouldn't let me have it, so that made it more desirable. So my brother and I both actually really were super into cars and racing because we were told not to be.
As much as like in America, the car has become part of the culture, I think in Britain it's even more so to some extent.
Yeah, it's also very condensed there. So it's a country that's as big as like, Virginia. But they're like 20 racetracks, maybe 30.
It's
and
incredible.
so it's all very condensed. So it's very hard to drive to grandma's house and not drive by a racetrack. So yeah, that's very much part of the culture there for sure. Motorsports is thought of there on the same level as things like soccer and stuff like that. So it's incredibly ingrained in the culture, and it's not thought of. Here you get a lot of negative stuff with racing. You don't there. It's pretty much 100% positive.
Yeah, and the other crazy thing about the UK is they've had such a glorious cottage industry of building cars, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, obviously you guys know the typical brands, Aston Martin, Bentley, right? Rolls-Royce. But if you go back in time, there were hundreds, dare I say thousands of people building cars in the UK.
Yeah. It was big. I mean, it was all the stuff sort of... Well, I guess it was pre-war and also post-war, but it was funny, like a week ago I was at Road America for the IMSA race and happened to go with the group I was with. We went and did a tour of the Harley-Davidson Museum, which I'm not a Harley guy, but they talked about the British cottage industry there, like how that affected the motorcycle industry as well. But yeah, even all the Formula One teams, with the exception of two, Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, are based in the UK.
Yeah, I know.
And so when you talk about cottage industry, and then I was just talking about how close everything is to one another, that's the thing. If you need like machine work done, carbon fiber work done, like any work done, and then need to go test it at a racetrack, you can go do that there very conveniently. And so it's made motorsports a big part of the British culture for sure.
All right, so as a young man, you were, dare I say, intoxicated, inebriated with the smell of gasoline.
I wouldn't use the word intoxicated, but I was
infatuated.
Infatuated. Oh my God, was I ever? And so yeah, and it wasn't like it was a banned thing. Like I remember watching Formula One races in England with my dad on TV. The few that they used to show back then, and he he was always kind of into it, but it was more like, that is not a profession. Like that's something you watch on television. It's not something you do. So that was a thing that kind of delayed me all the way through. I never even raced karts or any of that stuff, and it wasn't until I was 24 years old. I'd switched majors in college, so I graduated late with a mechanical engineering degree, and immediately went to Europe and entered a racing competition that I had planned to do, and it was money I had just saved up over the summer working construction, starting as a laborer, and then getting to be a punch-out guy and a construction superintendent, and then boom, I'm off to Europe, and I win the competition And that basically starts my motorsports career at a very old age, in relative to racing, where you're supposed to be 16, 17. when that happens.
I mean, look at the current Formula One field. In your
Yeah.
mid-20s, you're going to be like not aging out yet, but you'll certainly be one of the older guys.
Yeah, and so that was what was really hard for me. Like even in that competition, they were like, "You're too old," and I'm like, "Well, it's based on how fast you are," and they're like, "Yeah, but you're too old," and so they made my life really difficult, and it was always hard because I started so late and I didn't have a karting background. I was very naive. I thought, if you're fast, they'll just, the doors will fly open for you. And of course, there's politics in racing like you wouldn't believe, and nepotism and favoritism, and then a whole bunch of people showing up with millions of dollars that'll take that ride right out from under you. But through all of that, I scrambled together a career and managed to race and still continue to race to this day. And then, of course, have done a lot of other stuff along the way.
Yeah, so Paul, one of the things that he does, and I got to say, Paul, every race car driver I've met, and that includes you, has to be a little bit crazy. And I'll give you an example of that. So every year, Paul runs Pikes Peak, right?
Yeah.
Right, and then Pikes Peak is, for those of you, the second oldest race in America.
Yeah.
I think Indy's
a year
after
younger
India.
than India.
And basically, it's a hill, it's a race, it's a hill climb, a race into the clouds. You start in it's not Colorado Springs. What's the little
Well, it's near Manitou.
Manitou Springs,
It's Cascade, I think, is technically the town, but it's basically right at Crystal Reservoir on the Pikes Peak Drive, which is about at 9,100 feet is the start line, and then you go up the Pikes Peak Highway, which is just a normal tourist road, right? One of the highest paved roads in North America, and ends at 14,115 feet. And yeah, we race up that every year, and it's awesome.
And for all of you who are unaware of that race, I'll give you an example. I think a concrete example of just how steep and I would say challenging it is. If you go up there in your car, when you come down halfway through, they stop you and do a brake temperature test to make sure that you're not going to. That's going down. So imagine how steep that is going up, and then add to that, blind corners with 2,000-foot falls. And all kinds of crazy
rocks and trees,
weather conditions. Right?
It
just every year it varies, and so
it's awesome.
Or terrifying.
It's one of the great races, and it's to me every year I pinch myself and say I can't believe they still let us do this. That's like the coolest thing about Pikes Peak is it's sort of this anachronism of how racing used to be, and it's amazing. It's amazing to get to do, and you get to drive crazy cars up a crazy road, and that's just cool.
Yeah, and I think part of that also is that it's still very down home. You know what I mean?
It is.
It hasn't been like corporatized, I guess.
No,
which is really cool.
It's definitely a small operation. It's a great little team of people that do it every year that I'm friends with, and we're just like a family, at Pikes Peak, and that's what's really cool about it. But when you think about this little thing, is it like, so it's just local Colorado hill climb? Like, no. A good third of the competitors are international. Like, you get people flying in their cars from Japan and Australia and Europe, and they come from all over because it is literally the greatest, biggest, fastest, most awesome hill climb in the world. And because of that, it's really cool.
Yeah, for those of you who watch, let's just give them a kind of a something to calibrate their senses. For those of you who watch the Goodwood Hill Climb, it takes, a little bit over a minute to go.
No, it's 40 seconds, I think, is the record. Yeah.
Whereas the record up Pikes Peak is just a little bit under 10 minutes, right?
It's a 7:57.
7:57. So it's basically more than 10 times as long.
Yeah, it's over 12 miles, 12.42 miles, and 156 corners, and about 5,000 feet of elevation change starting at 9,000. So it's this crazy test. That's why the race was always so popular, because it's a crazy test of not only man but machine. It's very hard to keep your engine from overheating going up there. Even the electric cars overheat going up there. They overheat their battery packs and their motors. So it's this incredible challenge from a technical perspective to build a car that can do that. And then to drive it, right? So it's cool.
And so Paul's one of the crazy guys, and it's also one of the races that
he keeps saying it.
that I think some of the best drivers in the world aspire to.
Well, I mean, I would not, humbly, I would say, okay, that sounds great. But we do get really cool drivers there that come there and do the event. And they come from IndyCar and, all sorts of different disciplines around the world. And they show up there and they're always like, okay, this is different. And they have to kind of, again, you have to sort of humbly submit to that mountain and realize that that thing is no joke. And you have to approach it very rationally. You can't be crazy because you literally wouldn't make it. Like, you wouldn't get to do it year after year. I say that about racing all the time because people always think race car drivers are crazy. And it's like, not the good ones. The ones that sit there and have a career doing this, you can't just, take silly chances with something that can affect you very personally, physically, and can kill you. And it's back to the Ernest Hemingway quote that there's only three real sports in the world.
I take it one is bullfighting.
It is. Good one. The other one is mountaineering,
okay.
And the other one is race car driving. And it's like, because those are sports. They say, in his quote is, everything else is a mere game. Mm-hmm. And you think about it, you're like, yeah, it's kind of true, because those are the ones where you can die. And so you hold your life in your hands doing them. And that's what makes them cool, because to me, that's what helps me focus, is knowing that risk is there. I have a hard time, typical like ADHD dyslexic kid that played in the woods and banged his head too many times, and ended up with too many concussions and all of that kind of stuff. And it ends up being this thing where you realize, like, it takes that level of risk to get my mind to really focus. And so that's why I love the hill climb or racing generally, is it's the only time in my life where I'm like operating at 100%.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when it comes to your book, because there are a lot of great lessons that you draw from your racing career, and you can take into business world, you can take into general life, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So let's just keep talking about you though, and you're right, Paul. Sometimes, like, the closer to death you are, the more alive you feel.
Yeah, and as a result, the better you can perform. That's kind of the cool thing, where you think like people will panic, or they'll rise to the occasion. And so that magic phrase, it's kind of an old-timey phrase, but you still hear it, but grace under pressure.
Yeah,
right?
and
Grace under pressure.
And then, just to be clear, people die in that race. It's not as bad as like the Isle of Man,
No.
or every year,
Yeah.
But still, people do die. There was a tragic accident of a motorcyclist,
Yeah.
I think 2 years ago,
It was a few years ago.
where he passed away. But people do die, and
They do. Statistically, though, here's the thing: whenever it says driving on a racetrack or racing is crazy, per mile driven, it's safer to be on a racetrack than on a public road. And so that's something you always like. It's like people that are afraid of flying. Flying on commercial airliners is the safest form of transportation on the planet, including walking, like anything. It's safer to fly statistically than to go any other way. Than it's safer than driving to the airport. So people have that same sort of presumption about racing, that it's incredibly unsafe, because when you watch it on TV, you see, NASCAR crashing every race and this and that. But the cars are built to crash, right? They have these roll cages in them, and we're strapped in a 6-point harness. And so we're incredibly safe in the car, knock on wood. I've never been hurt in a race car crash. But I've hurt myself a lot on my mountain bike, or skiing, right? So, statistically way safer than taking a bath, safer than drive. So that's the thing to weigh against that.
So two things. I want to say, like 8 years ago, I think it was an M3 that went over the cliff. And if you watch the video on YouTube, it's almost like a comedy, because it just keeps rolling.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you're like, okay, it's going to stop rolling. It doesn't.
No. There was a big one this year, too, like that, but it just happened to be snowy. Yeah, Old Smoky.
Yeah. And this BMW just keeps rolling, and parts are flying off of it. And you're like, oh my God, these poor people.
They must be dead.
And then they
get out.
They get out and they look around like, what the heck happened?
Just go to YouTube and watch a highlight reel of rally car crashes. If you want to know, like, stuff you can walk away from, like where they're in the woods doing a $120 and then just instantly stop on a tree or go sailing off a road. They generally just get out of the cars. But racing, again, these cars are so safe. And so that's how you can push them so hard and not feel like, geez, I got a wife and kids, I shouldn't be doing this. It's like, this technically is safer than me driving here, in my road car.
But the problem with that is that works on intellectual level. So I could tell you this. I could tell you a fact, right? People sometimes are afraid to road trip because they think they can get in a car accident on the highway because they see all. But the chances of you getting in an accident are exponentially greater within 5 miles of your house than somewhere in Florida.
Yeah.
Because that's where you drive the most.
That
right?
you spend the most time there, and you kind of switch your brain off when you get close to home too, because you do it almost automatically. So you're not looking. You're not quite as aware in those very familiar drives as you are in an unfamiliar drive where you're like looking around going, I don't know this road, I'm going to pay attention. So yeah, there's all of that adds into it, but that's a good point.
All right, so let's talk about your career as a Stig. You were, for how many seasons?
It was 8 years.
8 years, so 8 seasons basically.
Yeah.
You were the Stig on the first series of Top Gear USA, which was Tanner Faust, Rutledge Wood, and Adam
Ferrara
was a comedian from New York.
Yes.
I would say that's probably the greatest trio, including you, quadruplet, I guess, of the American Top Gear, because
for sure of the American one,
After that, the ones they just can't get the chemistry right.
Yeah.
So. I think you can talk about this now, right? You can talk about it. So what was it like being the Stig on Top Gear USA?
It was interesting. Right. I mean, first of all, you have to say it was an awesome, amazing opportunity, right? It was very lucky to be able to do it and to be able to do it for that long. It had a very interesting selection process where basically I had an hour on a racetrack to do 2 laps, one in a Mustang, one in an Aston Martin. Everyone had the same thing. It was this crazy, weird cone track on El Toro, which is where the Top Gear track used to be, and there were over 50 people that tried out for it. And I ended up being the only person that managed to put together a clean lap of this crazy course, and I got the job because of that.
Congratulations.
And
I was going to say the only one that fit in the Stig.
Yeah, exactly. No, actually, that was
Paul's
all.
not the tallest
that
person.
That was all tailored after the fact. So yeah, I got the call that I had the job, and then it was funny. I remember I was on vacation in Florida with my wife, and we were at dinner. And they're like, we need your measurements now. And I went to the hostess station, and I'm like, I need a tape measure.
To find out how
So I went and stood in the bathroom and wrote it all down on paper and got all my measurements, and then texted this information right back to them. It's just the whole thing was like that. That was crazy. Like I'm like a spy.
Is it an advantage to be smaller and shorter as a race car driver?
Yeah,
I would think
sure.
it's like a jockey, right? Because the weight is important.
Absolutely. They'll build the car around you. Like even in Formula One, like George Russell showing up in Mercedes. That was a real problem when he substituted for Valtteri Bottas.
Because he was so much bigger.
Because he was so much bigger, and so his feet, he was wearing like cut-off shoes, and just the foot box, his feet didn't fit in, and of course he's too tall, so he's sticking up, and then aerodynamically, the aerodynamicists are going, we're going to have to get rid of your head. It's in the way of our clean aerodynamics, So and of course then his hands are, his elbows are hitting his torso while he's trying to turn the wheel, and it just doesn't fit. So, yeah, I remember the guy that was like the ultimate example, IndyCar racer from the early mid-2000s, Cristiano D'Amata. And he was tiny. I mean, the guy was like 5'1" or 2 maybe, and he weighed like 120 pounds, and every team's like, we want him, and Danny Pedrosa in MotoGP, like a little tiny guy. And that's just, when you're looking at power to weight ratios, the weight of the driver, right? And then, as I said, the aerodynamics, all that stuff matters.
When you're looking at lap times that are, a tenth of a second.
Yeah, or hundreds and thousands matter. Yeah, and they're like, whoa, our calculation shows that to be, a measurable time.
I wish I had known that growing up, because I'm Czech, and when
you
I was...
ate too much.
Yes, I did.
I
did too many dumplings.
You should have smoked cigarettes. That's what they did in Czechoslovakia.
Too many dumplings. So when I was growing up, there were a lot of good Czech tennis players. Martina Navratilova comes to mind.
Amazing.
And so my parents were like, you got to be a tennis player. I'm like, okay, if that's what you say. And then I spent 8 years of my life taking tennis lessons, going to tennis camp. And then when I had worked my way up to the second worst player on the high school team, my coach finally...
the way up.
In my senior year, he looks at me and goes, Roman, let's face it, you're no gazelle out there. And that's when I realized how important body type was.
You're like, because I'm a cheetah? And he's like, no, that's not where I was going with that.
No, Mr. Pastiak was not going there. Pastiak, I remember his name, He was not.
As he was walking you to the door. But then you end up as a triathlete, right?
Yeah, but it's like swimming, right? So swimming, there's 4 strokes, back, breast, free, and fly, right? And except for one of them, being tall is a huge advantage. So
Right.
breaststroke is the only one where you could kind of be short, and all the other ones, your wingspan is such a huge advantage.
Right.
So being short and lightweight is a huge advantage for a race car driver. But we kind of digress. So you made Top Gear. They fitted you into the Stig outfit.
Yes.
And how was it working with the guys? And what was some of the most memorable moments?
There's so many, first of all, because they put you into crazy situations all the time. And I'll say this about Top Gear. And
they canceled the UK one because they put people in.
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, and I worked with the
situations.
UK show, and I still do stuff for Grand Tour, and so I know all those guys and worked with them quite a bit.
The British trio.
The British guys, yeah, and Jeremy, James, and Richard, and the idea, and Andy Willman, who's sort of like the head producer, he and Jeremy came up with the concept of Top Gear while they were in school. It's a pretty well-known story. And the Stig was just someone they called an anonymous person that no one knew at the school. That was an anonymous character, and that's what the Stig was in the show, was an anonymous character. So that's where that name came from. But their goal was to try and hurt me. Like, they thought that would be funny. So they would always put you in the most dangerous situations. And they talk about health and safety and all that, but
I don't see Clarkson being
dramatic, right? Yeah, they just wanted things to go sideways, like quite literally. And if so they would give you scenarios where there was a high chance of failure, and they would all sit behind the cameras going, "This is going to be awesome." And and luckily there's only one time I ever damaged a car ever on the show, even though I could have. Like, they would be fine with that. They had backup cars and all this, but it goes against my grain to hurt a car.
Yeah, I'm like that too. So tell me, what did you damage?
So it was just an Odyssey minivan of all things. But what I was doing with it, we were in downtown Detroit. And what it was supposed to be was me pulling up and doing like a little handbrake turn, and then the guys were in cop cars, and they were supposed to see me, and then they were supposed to give chase, and we were in this blocked off, kind of run down area in Detroit.
Was this the episode with the Hellcats?
No, that was later. Okay. I did that one, but this one was earlier with Top Gear USA. That one was Grand Tour. That was with Grand Tour. So anyway, I instead of the little wimpy handbrake turn with the foot brake, I'm like, I'm going to do a big Scandi flick, and I'm just going to, huck it one way and then make it rotate and do a big slide, and I'm going to come literally sliding into the intersection. And, curb to curb, minivan, no practice. I hucked it in there. And on the slide, I just clipped the curb, but it wasn't enough. Like, we actually used the car for the whole shoot. It didn't even blow the tire out. But I hit the curb and I scratched the curb, and that was the one time. But we got the shot, and we went on from there.
So what were some of the coolest things that you got right, where it was dangerous but you got it right?
Oh, endless list of just crazy dumb stuff, that they had you do.
Give me the top three.
I remember actually close by here down at PPIR, and this is very typical. So I give
Pikes
you like
Peak International Raceway.
Yeah, Pikes Peak International Raceway, which is an
Pueblo.
oval track down in Pueblo, Colorado, or Fountain, and just coincidentally happened to be there, and we happened to be doing driving on Pikes Peak the next day. But I was there. And they just put me in when the last generation Corvette came out, so the C7.
Yep.
So they had a C7 Stingray, and this is typical, that they had borrowed from someone that had got a really early delivery. So it was just someone's personal car. It had like a few hundred miles on it, wasn't even broken in. I don't know any of that. All they do is they walk me out of my trailer, they put me in the car, and then they give me instructions. And they were like,
Top Gear USA.
Top Gear USA. Like, you're going to go up from here. I was on the infield. We want you to go up and take it up onto the banking, do a big slide, come down the pit lane, and there's cameras set up there. So we want you sliding on the banking and then come down the pit lane. So I'm like, okay. So no practice. You just go. And it's a manual transmission C7 Stingray. And so I go up there and I chuck it sideways and mad, and I'm on the gas. It's like third gear, okay, fourth gear, sliding up on the banking. This is kind of fast. And I'm like, okay, need to dive down there. I go diving down. And then do this big slide to a stop. There's the camera crew, boop, and hit my marks. It's pretty good, I thought. They're like, that was great. Let's do another one. And so then I turn around to go back, and as I'm idling back, I hear rod knock.
Oh, gee.
Yeah, and I'm like, uh-oh. And I don't talk to anybody on set. Like, they talk to me. The only person that knew me was Tanner.
Right.
So he was the only person I would actually have a conversation with.
So, even Rutledge didn't know who you were?
Nope, Rutledge and Adam didn't know who I was till the very end, and they were kind of mad about it the whole time, which we played upon, which is kind of funny. But that was like typical of what would happen. And then I had to like get someone's attention by clicking the radio. They'd send Tanner over, and I'd be like, it's got rod knock. And he's like, are you sure? I'm like, I shut it off right away. And you want me to start it again? It's like, yeah, go ahead and start it. Start it up. Knock, knock, knock. Like, shut it right back off again. You know, oil pressure lights on. Like, this thing needs to be on a flatbed right now, or this motor's lost. And anyway, I think it ended up getting warranted and all that stuff. But that's like super typical of how a shot went. They would give me a vehicle. They would tell me where the cameras were. And then I would just go. And then they would yell cut when I was supposed to stop driving, because I would just keep on going until I heard cut. Because you know, sometimes they have long lenses, sometimes they're panning you, and so you don't know when you're out of shot. It's not like when I've done like TV or movie work where everything is very carefully walked through and orchestrated. You get practice shots. They'll put marks on the pavement, like put the car here.
Right.
You see it in movies where you see the tire marks already. Obviously, they practiced it.
Yeah.
That's not what Top Gear was like. It was like, go do it. And that was the super challenging, but like the super awesome part about it too, because I had to develop that as a skill, like to be able to hop in something I hadn't driven, do something really dumb with it without hitting crew or hurting the car, and make it dynamic enough that they wanted to use it.
So for all of you kids listening, go away for a second. This sounds like porn. All right, come on back, kids. That's all I'm saying. So I'll tell you like a Top Gear story I heard. This is from one of the Ford people I know, and they were telling me that Top Gear. This is when they were doing basically soccer with Fiestas. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Right, where they would play soccer with Fiestas.
Yeah.
And the story was that the Top Gear called and they said, I think we need like 8 Fiestas, and you're going to get 4 of them back.
Yeah. I did.
This is Top Gear UK.
Yeah,
and Ford was like, okay,
that's
world's biggest car show. Okay,
that's the way it was like. So I said there was always extra cars. That's what I meant. There's a shot that they used on the Grand Tour of me jumping a Hellcat, and basically we were in this factory, and we were sliding around in the factory, and that's a whole story in itself. But anyway, there was this loading ramp, and I said, I can carry enough speed out of the factory that I can jump off this loading ramp, and I told them, I'm like, it'll probably break the car though if I do it. And
not you, but the car.
So they just turned and looked at the Dodge guy, which I happen to know the guy, Eric Heischel, and they turn and look at Eric, and they go, yeah, there you go, and from SRT.
Hi, Eric, if you're listening.
Yeah, and they just go, is that okay? And the way they ask it is like a leading question. Yeah. They're like, it's okay, right? Because we have a spare sitting right there, right? And they're always like, yeah, it's fine.
And did you break the car?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know how broken it was, but it didn't drive straight afterwards because it was either just I bent an arm or toe length.
Eric also races.
Great driver.
Yeah, he's a
That's
really
how I
good
met
driver.
him. Was at One Lap of America, like in the early 2000s. Very good driver. Cool guy.
Yeah, really cool guy. Did a lot with the Viper.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the SRT guys are a neat team, actually. I like those guys.
So were you sad when it all kind of ended? When, after 8 seasons?
Well, it was. This is a perfect segue. It basically was they were changing out the 3 hosts, which I didn't agree with because I thought the guys were really good.
It takes a long time to get like that kind of chemistry.
It's rare.
It's rare. It's so
really
rare. It's like I think people. And it's funny because I'm sure if anybody knows that, it's the Top Gear guys, and yet it's a franchise. It's a franchise show, and they keep and I was talking to a friend of mine who actually tried out for Top Gear, right? I think the magic is not just the chemistry, but I think you have to have people who know about cars, and not just know about them. Because right now the current crop of guys, they're like enthusiasts.
Yeah.
But
a comedian enthusiast.
I always felt, and maybe this is my bias, but I always felt like the show would be much better if the 3 hosts understood and like lived and breathed cars, which I felt like May, Hammond, and Clarkson did, or do to some extent.
Yeah.
And if you get somebody who's like, hey, I'm an actor, or hey, I'm an enthusiast, it's just it does.
Yeah, they kind of waffle through it all. It's not. It doesn't have this.
Right. It doesn't have like there's the passion is missing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, so was it sad when they
bid
adieu?
Well, I was given the option to keep going.
Okay.
And so they were just like, you're fine. You can keep doing this.
That's a great thing about being the Stig.
Yeah, you can be the Stig at the end of the time. As long as no one finds out who I am, and I've been very meticulous about that. Then you can just keep going. But that was right when I had written the book. and basically I'm like, this is perfect timing. I've been lying to everyone I know. Basically, there were 4 people that knew that I was a Stig. The rest of the people I had to lie to, saying I was going to go do this or that or the other thing, and that kind of gets old. As cool as it was,
I'm sure. Yeah.
And so
it's hard to live that.
I just thought I'll never have this moment where, and I actually talked that over with Tanner, and Tanner's the one that's like, dude, you got it. Do it. And so he just basically pasted together 2 pictures really quick while I was at his house. And then he put it out on Instagram and he goes, it's done. And I went, wait, what did you just do?
So he outed you.
He outed me. And Tanner has like 600,000 or 700,000 Instagram followers.
So he really outed you.
So it was done, right?
There was no
And so it was really funny how it all went down. So I was like, thank you. Maybe I want to kill you though, So I wasn't sure, and the worst part was, of course, the next day, I got a call from the BBC lawyers.
Oh, sure.
And they said I had violated a $4 million NDA.
Oh God.
That still was in play for 2 more years.
Wow.
So I thought it was okay to do it, and it wasn't. But then I got a call the next day after they let me sweat for 24 hours from the president of the BBC. And he said, you're good. Don't worry about it. Just don't go around wearing the suit. And I go, that's not what my intention is.
Sure.
I don't want to wear the suit. I want to use it to publicize my book.
Yeah, it'd be kind of, dare I say, lame to be at the county fair walking around like the Stig.
But you know how many people ask me to do it? Like, it's like every time I do some sort of appearance.
They want you to be the Stig.
Yeah, so I go do appearances, for different things, car, based things usually. And they're like, hey, would you? And I'm like, no. I won't wear it. I don't have one actually because they always, I would hand it back at the end of every shoot, and so then I decide not to go back. So they have all the gear. It wasn't like it was in my possession. I'm like, well, I'll just keep it.
All right, so let's talk about the book. Tell me about the name and tell me why you decided to write it.
Okay, so the
name of the book first.
The name of the book first is Optimum Drive,
right?
Available on Amazon.com and all fine major booksellers.
And it's basically, from my read of it, it's basically a how-to drive book, but it's more than that.
Yeah, and by the way, you of course helped.
Yes, a little bit.
You did.
I hooked you up with a publisher.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool.
I was not be good.
Well, it got the book going, and it got me to finish the book.
Yeah.
So that was all before I had left. You didn't know I was a Stig at that point. I was already driving for you guys here doing the track stuff, and so I basically was in your offices, and you were doing a conference call with this publisher about a book that you guys were writing.
Yeah,
about
Andre and Mr. Truck wrote a book.
Yeah, and so
I hooked you up with publisher.
And so Rome, to your credit, it was like you kind of blew me away and put me on the spot. It was awesome. You're like, hey, do you want to pitch your book really quick? And I'm like, because my book wasn't done. It was only like halfway done. And so I went in and went into the conference room and pitched this guy, and he's like, I love it. And they bought it like right away, and I was like, I guess I have to finish my book. So I went home and I started writing, and I finished it. It took me really another 6 months to finish it, and then it published in May of 2017, and it's done really well. So I have to thank you officially, right?
It did better than our book. Don't tell Andre.
Yeah.
Andre, sorry, Mr. Truck.
It's because it is kind of, and they were smart about it too. Like as far as the publisher, I called it Optimum Driver, and they were like, just call it Optimum Drive, and then it's like drive like motivation. And I was like, oh, that's clever because it doesn't lose any of its panache as far as being a driving book. But I just was a little bit more careful in my wording and everything, making sure that it wasn't so specific. Like driving was just the metaphor, right? It was top level race car driving, and the whole thing was that the book, the one thing we didn't talk about that I've done is that I've worked for racing schools and my whole life while I'm racing, and while I'm doing other stuff, while I'm being the Stig.
So you've not only been doing it, but you've been teaching it.
Yes. So I wasn't just like an instructor. Like for Skip Barber, I was the chief instructor of Special Projects Group. Jim Russell, I was the director of training. I ran it all. I wrote all the curriculums, trained all the instructors. I did ride and drive programs for decades. I still do it. I'm the chief instructor right now of the AMG Academy for Mercedes-Benz. And so that, and racing myself, and doing a bunch of Stig stuff, all of these things were like different perspectives on the same thing, doing stunt stuff, all of that. And then I also competitively mountain bike race. I did a lot of skiing and ski racing. I coached a lot, in everything that I do. And so all of that kind of is this perfect storm in my head of I should write a book about this. And because I'd seen it from so many different perspectives, and I think different sports, and then going through my own, sort of process and figuring all that out for myself, being a professional driver.
So let's not give the whole book away. And if you guys want to learn how to drive better, definitely buy the book. But let's talk about how race car driving has made you more in the moment, shall I say, has made you a better instructor, a better skier, a better mountain biker.
Yeah.
Because that's really the lesson of the book, right? What you can learn and take into your life that goes beyond just, being able to go around a track faster.
Yeah, it's definitely, once you do something well, you figure out a process. And then if you're very objective about that, you realize, wait a minute, this process kind of applies to everything. It applies to relationships. It applies to business. It applies to all these things. And then you start realizing when you start looking at it like that, very holistically, that so few people ever become at a level of something where they realize this process in their lives. And so I was like, wow, I've been really lucky in racing. Like, your feet are held to the fire all the time in motorsports. So it's not like you can get along in racing being mediocre. You can do it till the money runs out. But at that point, only people, if they're going to pay someone to drive their race car, they need to have results. And to have results, you need to be competitive within groups of people that are hyper competitive, and they're smart, and they have resources, and they train like crazy, and all these things. So it's kind of almost, it ends up being like when you think of like how Olympic athletes are, where they're dedicating their lives to something, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's what they do, right? That's how racing ends up in your life.
I think a lot of people don't understand that there was a significant shift from like the '60s when race car drivers were these playboys who would party all night.
Serious,
To now these guys are world-class athletes.
Yeah, speaking of triathletes, right? They're all doing something, and they have to.
Yeah.
The G-forces the car is in, the heat inside of the cockpit while you're racing. All the stresses you feel, the mental challenges are insane because it's one of the three real sports, right? So it's always hanging in your head. Like, if I'm bad at this, if I let things go sideways, this could cost me my life and my profession and all that.
You're not going to eat donuts and smoke cigarettes and be a successful race car driver.
Except for James Hunt.
Yes,
when you're watching
in the
Rush.
movie.
Back then. But now it's become it's so hyper competitive, and then you have data that measures everything 9 ways to Sunday, so you can't get away with anything.
We went. No, you drove the Technica, Lamborghini Technica, and I drove the STO, Big Willow.
Yeah.
And I got just a little bit of a taste of that because they had the telemetry equipment on the car. And I was driving, and Big Willow, you go up that big kind of right-hander, and then you come down
9 and 10,
and then you make another turn. Well, that second turn before the back straightaway, I went off two wheels, right?
Yeah.
I just got too wide, and I went off.
Yeah.
I got the car back on the track, and then the guy's looking at my telemetry, and he goes, "There was like a spike there," and he goes, "That must have been a butt clencher moment." I go, "Hell yeah, that was a butt clencher moment." But that's
what
funny.
That spike represents.
But they know to the fraction of a second, like how much brake you're applying, how much G-force is going, and it's incredibly numerically and statistically driven, and there's nothing harder. It's one thing to put yourself up against, that's why I love, there's two kinds of sports, right? There's like figure skating, which is beautiful. I'm not dissing any sport. There's but those are judged by people.
Yes.
And then there's the ones that are judged against the clock.
Yeah.
And to me, those are the hardest because the clock stuff, there's no hiding.
Yeah, it's objective, not subjective.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and there's no hiding.
Yeah.
It's like there's this shining bright light on
Yeah,
you.
and that's the way racing is because, again, they're spending millions of dollars a year, and you're the lucky dude that gets to drive the car, and they're all looking at you like, we could easily replace you if we had to, and we're investing millions.
And they will.
And they do. That's what I'm saying. So you have to perform at this really, really high level. And again, that's what, and especially with that, like the data you're describing, you have all of this. I mean, they can come and they can tear you to pieces if they want.
Oh, yeah.
And they can put another driver in the car and look at his data and then compare it against your data. And they can do all of that. So you're always under the gun. And so you figure out like most people stop getting back to sort of the book, most people stop when things kind of get hard. When you reach the point of diminishing return on something, that's where people stop. And so that's about when you can get like decent at it, and you can get like on the high end of average on something, whether it's jet skiing or skiing down a blue trail or the occasional black trail. You know what I mean? Like that's where most people stop. But in the racing world, that's where you get to work. And just like any sort of professional anything where you're talking about trying to strive to a level of not just competency, but excellence, that's when you get to work. But now you're in the realm of diminishing return, which means the time you were getting out of the time you were putting in other words, the reduction in lap time when you were only good at it compared to the amount of effort you were putting in to get that reduction in lap time, it was pretty sweet. Like you were like, wow, I can put an hour into this and I can get a second faster on the racetrack. This is awesome.
That's me. If I got in,
and it's like it's like the sweet spot, right? Because you feel like this is great because you feel like this reward to ratio is fantastic for the effort
Come home
versus
and you're
the
like,
reward.
honey, guess what? I just dropped a second.
It was so good, and you can imagine like the first time you do anything, you feel super clunky, and you can get into like Dunning-Kruger conversations and all this stuff here, but you feel really clunky, but then as soon as you get like this little glimpse of competence, you're like, oh, I'm actually okay at this. And then you get big rewards, right, for any sort of time you put in. And you got to think like I'm 30 years into this racing thing, like that's when I went to France, like in the very beginning. And now I'm so many years beyond that now I'm out like putting in hours and hours and hours of time thinking and doing and driving to find thousandths of a second around the racetrack. That's where I'm at, and it's incredibly time intensive,
and expensive,
and expensive.
You're through tires and brakes,
which is kind of a nice
cars.
thing. Yeah, exactly. And so that's where professional sports live, is in this uncomfortable zone of this very, very unhealthy amount of effort, obsessive amount of effort that goes into trying to reach a level of greatness rather than just being good at something. And so that's what my book really dives into, is that mindset and then a process as an approach to go down that rabbit hole. And again, most sane people will go, that's really stupid. I'd rather sit on the couch and watch football. And that's what most normal, smart people will do. But if you want to become really, really good at something, I've got a process for it, and it works in anything.
So Paul, I have to say, by the way, Paul Gerard, last name, if you're looking for the book on Amazon, I have to say, you're not making the sale of this book easier, because what people want to hear is, here's a pill.
Yeah,
you take this, and tomorrow you're going to be,
you remember
auditioning
Neo's
for the
journey,
Stig.
though? He took the pill, and then he had to get to work.
I know.
Yeah, so it's
But you see
the
what I'm
fantasy
saying?
versus the reality. Yeah, but it's, I know.
In
I
four,
could say.
in 4 easy steps.
That's right. Read my book and win a world championship, guaranteed.
In 4 easy steps, you'll move up the company to CFO or whatever your goal is. Yeah, it's not going to happen that way.
It's not, but it always is that. But the reason people don't start, it's that journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. They don't know the step. They don't know that first step, so they never start the journey. And so that's where the process comes in. And again, you decide how obsessive you want to be, how far you want to take it, how good to great you want to be, right? But all it is providing a process to do it that you could apply to anything, and it'll make you learn through that good stage much faster as well.
All right, so let me throw a monkey wrench into this.
Do it.
All right, because I used to do a lot of triathlon.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that there are certain people who are just naturally gifted.
No.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
I'll give you probably the most classic example I can. Okay.
Yeah.
Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
He started out as a triathlete.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the very first triathlon, the very first race he did, he won.
Yeah.
He won the race first time.
Yeah. But what did he do before the race?
I think he worked at a bike shop in Texas.
And trained like a crazy person.
But I'm just saying there is a level of natural talent that helps a lot when you start that journey.
This is in the book.
Right. Okay. Let's
not to give the whole book away, right?
Right.
But this is in the book. So natural talent, and my chapter in the book is called "The Myth
of Natural Talent. That's why I'm challenging you.
Yeah. So here's the thing, because I've seen this so many times with prodigies, right? And so There are people that can learn really fast. That is a question of simple intelligence, right? That's IQ stuff.
Sure.
I am not very high on that scale.
Right.
I'm persistent. That's how I get to levels on things. I'm just persistent. My
And
intelligence.
I think knowing you also work very hard.
Yeah, but that's it. That's what I'm
Hard
saying.
worker.
You have, but like for someone that's hyper intelligent, they can pick up this stuff, whether it's calculus or how to come up with a process for training for a triathlon. They can just do that quicker, right?
Right.
And so that's the big differentiator. And then if you're smart, you don't tell people. Lance doesn't go. Yeah, I've been training 8 hours a day for the last 10 hours. And they're like, this is your first triathlon? That's ridiculous. Because most people go to their first triathlon and fail, and then realize they need to train 8 hours a day. You know what I mean? Like, that's how most people do it. But occasionally, some people prepare really, really well, and then show up at their first event, and do really well at their first event. And everyone's, wow, you're just hugely naturally talented. And I always find that to be like, it's a bit, insulting's too strong a word, but you're discounting the work they put in. And I've seen that with karting, where people racing like go-karts, right? We call it karting. And they're very fast. They're not like the indoor karts or the little karts. Outdoor karting is serious
racing, yeah.
120 mile an hour,
with nothing
2G.
Nothing around you.
Yeah, I mean, it's intense racing. And they start them out doing that at 6, 7 years old. And then they plunk them in a race car for the first time and they fly. And they're like, wow, what a natural talent. He's already been racing for 15 years. Like this guy's got so much seat, or girl's got so much seat time at this point. And so that's where, if you dig into their backstory, you'll find out that intelligence is the differentiator, and that's just rate of learning. But the downside to that is that they get things easy, and so because they didn't have to work hard for it, they'll just leave and go do something else. Where if you put in like years learning to drive a car well, you're going to stay with that.
Yeah, because you
realize if you're going to go do something else, it's going to also take years to get good at it. But if you're like super smart and you pick up things really quick, those people tend to jump from thing to thing and get bored really easily. So I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse to be super smart in those areas, because you don't have that time invested where you stick with things.
It could be both.
It could be, yeah. And probably the really good folks do both, as usual.
All right, so head on over to Amazon, Ultimate Drive, Paul Gerard.
Optimum.
Yeah, sorry, Ultimate.
You did that so I could say it again.
Yes, Optimum Drive, Paul Gerard.
In stereo.
And check it out. In the last few minutes that we have left, let's talk about some of the recent cars that you've driven, and let's talk about what you thought of them, because the beauty of Paul is he can get behind the wheel of a car, and in a lap or two, he can like dissect it to a point that I could never get to with years of driving. So the last program you went on was the new Mustang Dark Horse, which is, some people say, well, Ford says it's the new generation. Most journalists believe it's a refresh. Basically, it's the same powertrain, same chassis to lesser or greater extent. The last true muscle car left standing, right? The Camaro's gone, the Charger Challenger twins are gone, so now there's only the Mustang, at least in internal combustion engine form with a V8. What'd you think of it on the track?
Well, first of all, the last time I had driven Mustangs, I drove 3 iterations, and one was a GT350, and it was for actually the opening sequence of the Grand Tour, the very first episode they ever did. And there was
the flat plane crank.
Yeah, the flat plane crank one. There was also the 700 and some horsepower one that I drove most of the time that Jeremy drove. No, it was before that. It was an aftermarket one, and then one was a Von Gittin Junior Mustang as well. So we had 3 different Mustangs, one stock 350, 2 modified ones, and so those are the last ones that I drove, and I liked them. And funny enough, I liked the GT350 over both the modified cars, even though it wasn't quite as fast. And so that sort of was my perception. And then I went to Charlotte. This is quite a few years now. So there's a big gap in between. But I've driven the Camaros in between.
Yep.
I've driven, notably, you sent me out to do the Cadillacs.
Right,
the Black Wings, the 4 and the 5, which were brilliant, by the way. Go watch those videos. Those cars are amazing. And so I arrive at Charlotte to drive the Mustang thinking like that. Like, this is, we've got basically the Cadillacs left, really. One's a supercharged V8. They're not really. They're 4-doors, so I get it. It's different. They're not pony cars.
Right.
But we're grasping at straws now because we don't have a lot to go on. So we have to kind of pull in cars from other categories almost. And so I went out and I drove it. And first of all, the track, like Charlotte Motor Speedway, I've driven on before. They've redone it quite a bit. And they have this big interior road course, so it's not just the oval. And but they had us on this little tiny thing. I mean, it was terrible. It had 2 right-hand 90-degree corners, and it had 5 180-degree second gear corners.
So this is kind of a mismatch of expectations and program. Keep in mind that when manufacturers let us go on the track, they understand, even though we hate to admit it, that we suck. That's why you do the car track reviews and not me. So they're very leery.
They're very conservative
of letting automotive journalists. Yeah. Because there's a big difference between being an automotive journalist and being a race car driver. And there are automotive journalists who can pull the two roles together, but they're far and few in between. And so then they're never like really eager to let us loose on a full track with a lot of speed, sharp turns, stuff where it's easy to get it wrong. And so the last time they actually allowed us to do that was when you went on the Lamborghini program at Big Willow. And
I was at Thermal. You were at Big Willow.
Oh, you were at Thermal. Okay,
yeah,
at Thermal, and you were actually quote unquote racing their test driver.
Yeah, I had the guy that had won the championship, super guy, amazing guy, and he and I just went out and played, and we had a great. But that's normally like how it would go. But we were on a reasonable track there at Thermal. It's not the best track in the world, but at least it's got a combination of things.
Which one were you on? Because there's a bunch there at Thermal.
It was let's see, the one on the right I guess the north course.
Yeah, okay.
It's the normal one that usually is.
Not the one that goes all the way around the house.
Correct,
okay.
yeah. I actually did some Top Gear stuff there too. We ran the whole thing all connected together backwards. The last season of Top Gear.
I got to drive the M4 competition on that one? Not the one you buy, but the race car version.
Oh, yeah, cool.
You know what I mean? The one that they take all that.
Yeah.
And I looked like the Michelin Man to begin with. So going into the car, I was already feeling, chubby and rotund. So
then you get in a racing seat, right?
Then I get in a racing seat, which I don't fit into, and then of course you got the helmet with the air, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the modulating brakes.
Are you 6'3" or 6'4"?
I'm 6'2".
6'2". Yeah. I mean, he's a tall guy. I'm 5'7".
My head's always a little like, it's always a little crooked.
Hence the jockey thing. It's like it's a good thing for cars, especially race cars.
And then we got to, it was like a lead follow, which it in itself isn't that crazy because hopefully the professional is not going too fast, but then like the automotive journalists get into like a competitive mood, and there's always one guy who like does track time, so he's the one like pushing the race car driver to go faster, and then there's me like completely
like, can we
slow down a
can
little
we go into the pits maybe? Make it great. And I'm the other guy making your life miserable.
Yeah, and then of
generally,
course I think the biggest difference, of course, for me at least, from being on the track to being on the road is it's a completely different braking style, right? On the track,
completely different.
On the track, it's like full on as late as possible, right? And you're used to coming off the road where you slowly apply pressure, and that does not work on a racetrack.
It's degressive versus progressive, right?
Yes,
we brake progressively on the road.
Yes.
We brake super hard at first, and then slowly reduce braking on
and
the
that's
track.
a hard thing to get your head around.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you even know that is a feather in your cap.
So
that's way one step up on most people that I see at events like that.
And of course, this car was super light, and it had race car brakes, and so they're incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
right. You look at them, and the car goes
everything Roman doesn't like.
No, and the things that terrify me. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. I always get a call after those programs like, I should have sent you on that one.
Yeah.
That's the norm. I'm like, you should have.
But see, the problem is, Paul needs a video. You don't need one, but it would be helpful to have a videographer with you, and sometimes they don't allow that.
Yeah.
And then I'm stuck, going on this program in my fat Michelin Man suit. Anyway, so they didn't let you loose on the big track.
Yeah. So it was a really tight track. So it's these second gear 180-degree corners, like a ribbon.
By the way, just so you know, the manufacturers don't like it when we bring race car drivers.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, because you're actually going to like. You couldn't.
I'm going to get blacklisted.
You have to get blacklisted, but with journalists, the manufacturer could be like, "Look over here, not over here."
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
But with you, this is where you're looking.
They generally, like, I'll tell you, like the Hyundai one.
Yeah.
They loved having me there,
Okay.
and I did debriefs with the engineers, and the guys they flew over from Korea.
And by the way, they were like, they gave them this prototype
the electric car, yeah.
And the engineers and their like test car drivers were afraid to drive it full out.
I did it.
And then race car drivers are crazy.
I did the quickest autocross lap, the quickest track lap, and the quickest lap.
And they were like, how'd you do that, Paul?
I'm like, but see, those are fun. So you're right. I mean, sometimes the Mustang guys, I don't think necessarily really liked having me there, but when I did like the Type R Honda, those guys were super accommodating. They liked it.
Yeah.
And the Hyundai guys were over the moon. They really liked it because they're like, oh, you'll give us really granular feedback, which is kind of to your point of what we're getting at here with our Mustang discussion.
Yeah, and from a TFL point of view, I mean, if you design a car to be track worthy,
yes,
then you got to give it to a track driver.
Yeah.
Because that's the way that the engineers designed the car, so that's the way it should be evaluated.
Because they try and slip them in under the radar if they're not really well developed. And they can do that if the drivers who are testing the cars can't feel that. And actually, like the Cadillac guys were awesome too. Like they were super. And I ended up doing debriefs with those guys as well with their engineers. They're like, "Tell us what you thought." I love that. But it's like you go to some of them and they're like, "Don't tell us a thing." Like we're trying to do a smoke and mirrors act here. And so it's interesting when you go from one to the other like that, and they're very different. And crazily enough, it all depends on how good the product is.
Yeah.
Like if the product's really sorted, they're incredibly open and transparent, and they love having me there. And if the product has some issues, then they're not so happy.
So before we talk about the Mustang, I'll tell you a car that everybody loves that I hated.
Do it. I'd love to hear this.
All right. So thank you, Porsche, for inviting me to go on. It was the small willow track, the urban.
Yeah. Streets of Willow.
Streets of Willow. Yeah.
Streets of Willow.
So I took the GT4 RS.
Yes.
Which is this beautiful.
Why was I not there?
Yeah.
Why?
Beautiful car. It had the Weissbach package.
Weissach, yeah.
Weissach, I would say that wrong. And we did a lead follow. The car in front of us was a Porsche 911 Turbo, but the lightweighted one.
Mm-hmm.
And the amazing thing, the good thing I'll say about the car is the amazing thing was like in a straight line, the Porsche just right.
Yeah, the turbo.
Yeah,
gone.
just gone. But around the turny bits, I could keep up with them.
Yeah.
So beautiful car, beautifully executed, but
were you screaming the whole time, or were you having a good time?
No, I was just pissed off at how loud and how uncomfortable and how I like. If you're going to design a street car for the racetrack, I give you big thumbs up if you can, because there's two. It's like it's like the off-road world, right? Everything that makes a car good off-road makes it really bad on-road. Right, a lift gives it worse fuel economy.
It's all compromises. Everything is a compromise.
And the same thing happens with street and race cars.
Yeah.
So I love street cars that you can take on the racetrack. I don't like race cars that you can take on the street.
Right.
Because the only thing I kept thinking to myself, and it's got these incredible induction.
Yes.
It comes
intake
in right,
tubes, like
right,
right behind your head.
ear, right.
Yeah.
And the only thing, and then the steering is so quick, but it just becomes like a. McLarens do this too, right? When you're not a 10/10, you feel like you're like this purebred racehorse
sneeze.
that just wants to like, and you're like holding it back, right? It's just no fun.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, if I like took my wife to dinner in this car, I would get like 2 blocks before.
The whole dinner you'd be like dreading the drive home.
We wouldn't get there. We wouldn't get
there.
No, she'd be like a block into it. She'd be like, pull over, let me out of this thing.
Right.
And I know. As an automotive journalist, I should be like, wow, that thing was incredible. The sound, the induction note. But I'm just thinking to myself, like, who is buying this car? Who is buying this car? And maybe the answer, unfortunately, becomes people who maybe take it on the track, but maybe because it's such a, the RSs of the Porsche world are now so highly collectible that it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
It's just because.
An investment opportunity, or
yes,
they're just like,
yes.
even if I don't like it, I can flip it.
Right.
Kind of thing.
And I haven't driven the GT3 RS yet.
Yeah.
But I also feel like that's going down.
That's pretty serious. That's a serious car with serious downforce. That's actually like a game changer. That car, the RS,
right?
Because of how adjustable and aero it is, where it's very close to a GT3 race car, and they can get away with it a little bit with the magnetorheological shocks and all of that, where it has a comfort mode. They can close the exhaust flapper valve. They can do all that, right? But it's never going to be a comfortable road
But
car.
and I'll get to the heart of the matter. Why
Yeah.
that car just didn't like click with me. And I know I'm not preaching to the choir here. I'm actually probably going the wrong way. But behind this door is a Raptor R,
Yeah.
which is the most off-road worthy outside of the TRX truck you could buy. And yet you could drive that thing every single day.
Perfectly fine to drive.
Perfectly fine.
Yeah,
You
they're
can-
actually because and
you can tow with it.
Funnily enough, like those trucks are super cushy
Yes.
compared to a normal pickup truck, so they actually ride better. Those long travel
Yes.
trucks actually ride better than normal pickup trucks.
And outside of the fuel economy,
So-
you could drive it every single day.
Yeah.
You could take your wife, your
Outside of the
kids.
fuel economy.
Outside of fuel economy. But that's also race cars.
Yeah.
But so to me,
Yeah.
Ford there has actually done some magic by making this vehicle that you could actually go on the, probably couldn't take the Baja 1000 with it because it would break, it would fall apart, but you could certainly take it, to
Wait,
Baja.
you're talking about the Raptor?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Yeah,
We're not talking about a Mustang right now.
No, don't talk about the Raptor, right?
Just to be clear.
But anything you ever want to do with it as
Yeah.
an amateur, you could do.
Yes.
And you'll still be like at 10% of its
Well,
capability.
I think, but that's because
why
of an
can't Porsche do that?
Well, because it's different. Because
Okay, all right, explain that
to my
to me.
point. Because
Okay.
having 36 inches of wheel travel,
Mm-hmm.
right, or more like a normal road car has, and then you get into a truck and maybe a normal road car has about 3 or 4, and then you get into an SUV that might have 6 or 7, then you get into a pickup truck that might have 8, and then you're getting into these vehicles that have 20 plus, right, that have real wheel travel with real actual motorsport quality damper shocks on them. And so with all of that, so it can take the whoops and it can kind of do Baja. You could make a good, you could jump it off a dune and you can get 6-8 feet of air in a Raptor and not break it.
Yes.
So that's kind of awesome. So all that stuff that you're adding capability, when you're talking about the compromise is you're adding cushiness, which makes the ride nice. But in racing, you're going the other way. You're going away from compliance and you're adding firmness to gain, like I want to go from 1G to 1.2G to 1.3 to 1.5 to get to this Porsche GT4 RS now that can do 1.7, 1.8G. That is a stiff car that can do that. You got to control roll, you got to control pitch, and so that's the beauty of the truck, is to make the truck a more extreme truck. You're actually making it a softer riding vehicle with longer travel. But to make a race car, you're taking that travel
But
that you need
that's
to
the
make.
challenge.
But just inherently in the physics of it, and so they do the Magna Ride shocks, and but it still needs a firm spring when it's on the track. It still needs a firm bump rubber. It still needs a big, thick anti-roll bar. All of those
But
things.
like that induction note that everybody like swoons
Yeah.
over.
Well, they could put a flapper valve on that and get rid of it if they wanted.
Yeah, you don't have to have.
That's a choice.
I want to say the decibel level in that vehicle when you're accelerating, it's got to be like 110, 150.
It's like a Pink Floyd concert in the '70s or Led
Yeah,
Zeppelin.
it's that loud right behind.
Yeah,
you.
we're that old. That's my reference.
So there's no compromise there.
Yeah. No, but they
So-
could.
so like-
That's
so-
choices.
So
That's
like
choices.
Porsche's doubling down
That's
on
choices,
their
yeah.
race heritage.
Yeah, that's choices. They could make that car, again, with just a little bit of a couple valves here and there, just like they do with their exhaust, but they can make it as quiet as a normal Cayman.
And that's a
They
good
can make it
analogy.
as quiet as a normal
Be
GT
the
car.
Raptor too,
You know,
right?
911.
It's got 4 different exhaust notes. So it's
Yeah.
got quiet, if you want to leave late in the morning or late at night. It's got normal, which is, sounds like a great V8. It's got loud, and it's got Baja mode.
Right.
So why can't, these are the compromises that a good engineer could make
Yeah.
to make the car livable, right?
They could do it.
So to me, and you're with me on this too, right? When you make, I love, we used to call them dual sports. Now they're called enduros again.
Yeah.
So we started out enduros, and then went to dual sports. We're talking about motorcycles
Yeah.
right now. Motorcycles that can both go on road and off road. Same problem, right?
Yeah.
And yet, because of technology, because of software, you can now have a pretty competent enduro that is good on road and yet is also
Yeah.
capable off road.
Yeah.
But this car is so laser focused.
Yeah, and I think that's intentional because, like you're saying, that's choices. It doesn't have to be. I think the Turbo's a pretty good example with Porsche, where that car is pretty darn quick, but also very livable. Livable because you're going from basically a GT car to a sports car. So those are 2 different genres of vehicles. And yeah, you could build one with technology that kind of bridges that gap. But they like making lots of variants of cars. So I think they're doing that on purpose to have all these variants.
Fair enough.
Because those are all profit centers for them.
So Porsche, if you're listening and you're doing a program, we've got the man right here to.
I'll happily come and drive them, especially the fast stuff, and I'll that's the thing to me, and I would love to be on those lists. It was great to get to go do the Technica,
Yep.
and to do the CTSVs and all of that stuff.
Thank you, Jordan.
That stuff's
Lamborghini.
that stuff's fantastic. But I want to go do some Ferrari stuff, and any of those launches that are going on. Even
I want to go do something. Me and you. How about I'll be your videographer?
You can be the videographer,
and you do the driving. There you go,
yeah,
Ferrari.
you can do the first lap and go, okay, it's not for me, and then I'll jump in it from there, just to be sure.
You know what that sound is? That's the sound of crickets from Ferrari. I think even to get on the
I haven't even driven a Z06 yet. So.
Neither have we.
Yeah.
So Chevy, if you're listening, we'd love to get.
I need to do a track thing in a Z06 because that car's supposedly amazing, and judging by how good the GM folks are with the Camaros and the Black Wings, I believe it.
I'm going to give you. I just talk about this. I'll talk about this again. So we just bought a C5 Corvette that Tommy ended up buying, and then we bought a C6 Corvette. And I made the comment that like everybody, all the cool kids want like a Lotus Evora.
Yeah.
And I'm like, guys, for like, I think we bought that C6 for $20-some thousand. You can get yourself but because it's not the cool car, because it's the old man car, people somehow, and Corvette has always had that issue, right? Until recently, it's always been kind of the old man car. And yet I think GM has done a lot of really interesting engiering. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast.
It is.
So tell me about the Dark Horse.
Are we going to talk about the Mustang?
Yes, let's talk about the Mustang.
So now that we got through the track,
I know.
So I jump in it and I drove the car, and to be honest, like my original first lap out impression, which is the one that's on the video, was, and I wish I'd done another one because I was like initially like super impressed because what I felt right away was like, wow, look how responsive everything is. So that was my first thing. And as I kind of went out and they were only giving us 2 laps. So it was like a warm up, a couple laps, boom, bring it in. So the second time I went out, I was driving the car much harder. And then that first session, as I was getting acquainted with the track, I'd never driven the track before, by the way, that configuration. So I had to learn all those tight corners and all that, all normal stuff. And I'm like, holy cow, for my first impression of the brakes was they're so powerful. But then I realized once I had moved my braking point down to where it needed to be, which was 3 markers past where they recommended we were braking, when I did that, you get into the ABS right away, which is fine. I'd rather it not kick in quite so quickly because the system's like super over boosted. And then once you're in the ABS, you're kind of in this quagmire of brake feel. So it gets very hard. And so, like you can apply, we were already talking about braking and how in racing we apply the brakes really hard, digressive braking, it's that super hard application. But the caveat to that is we always release really smoothly. The brake release is always really slow, and it's also very important. The brake release is not just when I'm done braking, but it sets the balance of the car at the turn into the corner. So it's incredibly important as a tool. You can't get a car in a corner well if you can't release a brake very granularly, which is the word I like to use. It's just very fine little micro 1 pound adjustment, just perfect balance the car turns in without understeering or oversteering too much. And so when you're in that quagmire of ABS, you lose that ability. So the brake release becomes this sort of mushy, unpredictable thing.
And for all you guys who haven't seen Paul on the racetrack, the first thing that we always do, or he likes to do, is obviously turn off all the aids. Right,
yes.
Because that's when you can really tell how a car is set up.
That's you find out the bones of the car, not what they've masked with electronics.
Yeah, because once you have the electronics, you can cover up a lot of sins.
You can cover up anything.
Yeah,
which is what they used to do with the old Corvettes, by the way, which you don't need to do with a C8 now. The C8 has such good bones and such good natural inherent balance and capabilities that turn it all off, and it's brilliant.
Turn off traction control, turn off
stability control,
everything.
But you can't turn off ABS, obviously.
So ABS comes in too early.
So it comes in, it's over boosted, so it doesn't take much pressure to trigger the ABS, and then once it's in, it's very hard to get out. So that was the thing I sort of learned on that second one.
Especially with the grippy tire.
Very grippy tire, yeah. And the tire lasted for just barely those 2 laps. It would start to get a bit slidey, so not great longevity on the tire. But boy, the G numbers, 1.5 G under braking, like that's a monumental number, right?
Yeah. It's eye-popping.
Yeah, it is kind of eye-popping. For a road car on a non-R compound, I mean, it's a Corsa RS Pirelli, so it's a good tire, but it's not like a Pilot Cup 2 or Cup 2R. It's not a track-focused road legal tire. like you have on your GT4 RS we were talking about. So that was kind of the downside there under braking, was it was very difficult to modulate the braking. And then the other part to that car was the steering, and I use the same word again, very overboosted. And so yes, it's an EPAS system, electric power steering system, which we can talk about negatively forever and ever.
They're getting better.
They're getting better, right? But
they're getting better.
I get in my car when I get back from the airport with its hydraulic power steering, and I'm like, that's what steering's supposed to feel like.
And this car is? What car is that?
My Evo.
Okay, your Evo.
Yeah. Or the Porsche. I have a 2001 and a 2003, and both have hydraulic, Boxster S, and both of those have really nice steering. And so I noticed that when I come back. But yeah, so the steering's so overboosted. So what that means, they're using a really fast ratio. So that means very little turn on the wheel required to get a lot of turning out of the rims, out of the tires, right? So it turns in like crazy, but
so you're saying you need a yoke to get the most out of it.
Yeah, you could use a yoke because so it's a fast ratio and it's overboosted, and so what that means is you're getting and it's non-linear. So you're getting a lot of turning and for very little movement of the wheel, and you're also therefore not getting much feel coming back through the wheel. So it's very numb and it doesn't provide feedback. Let me give you examples. So when a tire approaches the limit, you have in your steering geometry, like you'll feel that limit approaching because the tire's slip angle forces are building and the tires are twisting and twisting and twisting on the rims, and then eventually they let go, right? And so this twisting you can actually feel through the wheel. You can feel the weight change. You can also feel slightly different vibration sort of tonality through the wheel. The wheel, you can feel it moving in your hands ever so slightly as these forces build. And then you can feel the inside tire. It'll slide first. You'll feel the inside tire let go. And these are the things that you use in a good steering system to judge the limit of the front tires. So there's information there. Now, 99.98% of the population doesn't know what I just talked about. That's race car driver stuff. But it is absolutely track driving stuff. Like, this is what you want steering to feel like. You want granular feel in your steering so I can judge the front grip of the car. In other words, I don't have to get to the understeer point and do it on experience. I can feel it in real time whether the front's going to slide or not, and I can hold the car at that moment before it slides. So I know it's making maximum grip there, and then I can balance the rear to do the same thing. And I also couldn't feel the rear very well in the car.
So the outcome of all that is the fastest possible turn because
you're optimizing the tires.
You're at the limit of adhesion, but not
yes.
Yeah. Like
So there's this little tiny window of peak slip angle where the tire is just holding on, and then boom, it lets go and slides. And so what you're trying to do is hold it right at that peak, and then you're trying to do that with your front tires, and then once you get comfortable doing that with your front tires through steering feel, then you're trying to do that with your rear tires also through what you feel through the seat of the pants. And that was also a little bit of a problem with the car because it has a Recaro seat. It's an optional seat. And Recaros, by the way, amazing seats. I have them in the Evo, comes with the cars. They're fantastic. But these ones in the Mustang are a little bit soft and bouncy vertically. And so I'm not getting that feel through the seat back that I really wanted either. So it's funny, Andre said this the other day. We were talking about this a little bit. But he goes, it's kind of video gamey. I go, that's exactly what it is. When you take the feel out of a car, you turn it into a video game, which is really funny because we always complain about simulations not having feel, and you spend all this money on this $1,500 Fanatec wheel with force feedback and pedals with feedback, just so you can get this feel on your actual simulator. And it's the same issue with road cars with electric power steering. They don't have good feel, and you don't have good pedal feel. It's hard to judge everything on the car. And so it does get a little video gamey. And that's where this car is. And again, comparing that against, and it's fast. 1.5G braking, 1.38G cornering, right? Those are big numbers. But it just doesn't feel great doing it.
I would say we could compare it to the Camaro, but we can't.
Yeah, well, I can compare it to the one I've driven before, and the Camaro, has an electric power steering system, and no, it's not as good as my Boxster or my Evo, but it has much more feel in it, and the Cadillacs are the same way. You can judge front grip through those systems. So it is possible, and the Porsche systems are, like you said, getting better, quite good. You can feel front grip through the Porsche systems as well. So this is not something that I'm saying like there are no cars that have feel. I'm just saying that in this particular car, they've overboosted this system and taken what possible feel there could be pretty much out of the equation.
Well, guys, thank you for spending this, it's been an hour and 15 minutes with us. And Paul and I decided to do this because we'd like to get Paul on more podcasts, maybe even get his own. So in the comments below, let us know if you like this bonus episode. And if so, we would love to get Paul and all of his contacts, all of his friends on a separate podcast, kind of aim more at the enthusiast / racer community. The stuff we do tends to be kind of the everyman Robin stuff, right?
Yeah.
But Paul lives a world that is very popular now with Formula One racing, and we want to take advantage of that. And we want to take advantage of you and your expertise. So let us know in the comments what you thought. And Paul, thank you. And check out his book, please. Go to Amazon.com. It's not Ultimate Drive, it's Optimal Drive.
Optimum.
Only make that mistake. Optimum
Drive.
God, Roman. Been a long day already. On Amazon. And thank you very much, dude.
Thank you, Roman. Always fun to chat.
Yeah, we'll
Always
see you guys
fun.
next
Thanks,
time.
guys.
Ciao.